What if the World Cup never existed? Imagine waking up in a world where billions of people never gathered around televisions, screaming in joy, fear, heartbreak, and hope for 90 minutes. Imagine a world where entire cities never stopped moving because of football. Imagine a world where children in the poorest neighborhoods never dreamed of becoming global legends because there was no global stage to reach. Imagine a world where names like Pelé, Diego Maradona, Zinedine Zidane, Ronaldo Nazario, Ronaldinho, Lionel Messi, and Cristiano Ronaldo were never transformed into symbols larger than life by the pressure and mythology of the World Cup. That world would not simply be different in sports. It would be different economically, different politically, different emotionally, different culturally, different technologically, different psychologically. Because the World Cup is not just a tournament. It is one of the largest human rituals ever created. And the strange thing is this. Most people think the World Cup is only about football, but the deeper you look, the more you realize the World Cup quietly reshaped civilization itself. Entire economies evolved around it. Governments used it. Corporations became richer because of it. Television networks exploded because of it. National identity became stronger because of it. Entire generations emotionally bonded because of it. And perhaps most importantly, billions of ordinary people found temporary meaning, unity, and emotional escape inside it. Now remove all of that. Erase the World Cup from history completely. No FIFA World Cup in 1930. No iconic finals. No global football culture explosion. No football gods. No unforgettable moments replayed for decades. No universal language of the game. What happens next? Would football still become the biggest sport on Earth? Would Europe still dominate global sports culture? Would brands like Adidas and Nike become giant empires? Would countries still spend billions building stadiums? Would YouTube football culture even exist today? Would sports media become this massive? Would nations lose one of the only peaceful ways humans compete emotionally without war? This is not just a sports question. This is a civilization question. Because sometimes one event changes history so deeply that humanity forgets what life looked like before it existed. And the World Cup is one of those events. To understand how important it became, we first need to understand the world before it existed. The early 1900s were a completely different planet psychologically. There was no internet, no smartphones, no social media, no global live streams, no instant communication. Most people would live and die without ever seeing another continent. National identity was becoming extremely powerful. Countries were becoming emotionally tribal. Empires were competing for dominance. The world was becoming more industrialized, more connected, but also more dangerous. And sports were beginning to evolve into something far bigger than entertainment. Sports were becoming emotional weapons, symbols of pride, proof of superiority, proof of civilization, proof that one nation was stronger than another. Football itself was spreading rapidly across Europe and South America. Factories played it, workers played it, poor neighborhoods played it, schools played it. Ports helped spread it internationally. British influence carried football across oceans. Soon Argentina loved it, Brazil loved it, Italy loved it, Germany loved it, Uruguay loved it. Football spread because it was simple. You needed almost nothing: a ball, open space, and people. That simplicity became revolutionary. Unlike expensive sports requiring elite access, football belonged to ordinary people, and ordinary people transformed it into obsession. But even as football exploded internationally, there was no single global stage uniting the entire planet emotionally. There were regional competitions, friendly matches, Olympics football tournaments. But nothing felt mythological. Nothing felt ultimate. Human beings naturally crave ultimate stages. The biggest movie, the biggest war, the biggest achievement, the biggest championship. Humans are storytelling creatures, and stories become powerful when there is one final mountain everyone dreams of climbing. Football had no Mount Everest yet. Then came FIFA. FIFA began imagining something radical, a global football tournament where nations from different continents would compete for one trophy. Today, this sounds normal. But at the time, it sounded almost impossible. Travel was slow, communication was difficult, international coordination was chaotic, and politically, nations distrusted each other heavily. Creating a tournament involving the world sounded absurdly ambitious, but ambition is often how history changes. In 1930, the first World Cup was held in Uruguay, and humanity unknowingly opened a door that would never close again. At first, nobody understood how enormous this thing would become. Only 13 teams participated. Traveling itself was exhausting. European teams crossed oceans by ship. The tournament looked tiny compared to today's giant spectacle. But psychologically, something historic had begun. For the first time, nations emotionally fought through football on a truly global stage. That changed everything. Because humans are tribal creatures. People want belonging. They want identity. They want symbols larger than themselves. And national football teams became emotional mirrors of entire populations. Suddenly, victory meant more than sport. Victory meant national pride, national dignity, national status, national validation. Loss became emotional pain shared by millions simultaneously, and that collective emotional experience became addictive. Very addictive. The World Cup slowly evolved into one of the few events capable of making entire countries feel the same emotion at the same moment. Think about how rare that is. Billions of people live completely different lives, different languages, different religions, different politics, different social classes, different realities. Yet during the World Cup, strangers hug each other in streets, enemies celebrate together, families gather together, cities stop moving, entire economies temporarily slow down, schools pause classes, workers secretly watch matches, restaurants overflow, bars explode with emotion, airports become quieter during important games. Even wars have occasionally paused because of football. That level of emotional synchronization is historically rare. And without the World Cup, humanity loses one of its greatest synchronized rituals. Now imagine football without this tournament. Would football still become globally dominant? Maybe. But probably not at this scale. Because the World Cup transformed football from a sport into mythology. And mythology is what truly controls human attention. A normal competition creates fans. Mythology creates generations. The World Cup created legends so powerful, they escaped sports entirely. Pelé became more than a football player. Pelé became a symbol of Brazilian excellence, a symbol of possibility, a symbol that talent from poverty could conquer Earth. Without the World Cup, Pelé might still become famous, but not immortal. Immortality requires a global stage, and the World Cup created immortality machines. Then came Diego Maradona. Diego Maradona was not just an athlete. He became a political emotion, a spiritual icon, a representation of rebellion, a representation of national pride. The 1986 World Cup transformed him into a mythological figure forever. Without the World Cup, the famous Hand of God moment never happens. The legendary solo goal against England never happens. One of the most analyzed moments in sports history disappears entirely, and history changes psychologically. Because humans are shaped by symbols more than facts. The World Cup continuously produced symbols, moments repeated endlessly across generations. Children watched old highlights and inherited emotional memories from eras they never lived through. That matters deeply, because civilizations survive through shared stories, and the World Cup became one of humanity's largest storytelling engines. Now think economically. Without the World Cup, global sports business becomes much smaller. Far smaller. Today, football generates hundreds of billions of dollars globally. Broadcast rights alone became gigantic because billions watch the World Cup simultaneously. Companies realized something terrifyingly powerful. Human attention is the most valuable resource on Earth, and the World Cup captured enormous amounts of it. Once corporations understood this, everything changed. Advertising evolved. Sports marketing exploded. Sponsorship culture expanded aggressively. Brands no longer sold products. They sold emotion. They sold identity. They sold dreams. And the World Cup became the perfect emotional marketplace. A commercial shown during the World Cup could influence entire continents. That level of exposure became priceless. Without the World Cup, modern sports advertising evolves much slower. Companies like Nike and Adidas might still become successful, but not with the same global emotional dominance, because the World Cup amplified football heroes into walking marketing empires. One iconic tournament performance could change a player's entire financial destiny overnight. One winning goal could create sponsorships worth millions. One unforgettable moment could turn athletes into international brands. The tournament became an economic accelerator machine. Entire industries formed around it. Sports journalism expanded because audiences demanded endless coverage. Television networks paid massive money because audiences guaranteed attention. Streaming culture eventually exploded partly because sports audiences trained people to consume live global events together. Even social media engagement patterns were heavily shaped by sports conversations. Without the World Cup, internet culture itself evolves differently, because global shared moments help shape digital behavior. Now imagine the political consequences. Governments quickly realized the World Cup was more than entertainment. It was power, soft power, psychological power, image power. Hosting the World Cup became a way nations introduced themselves to the world. Countries used it to appear modern, strong, safe, successful, important. Some governments used the World Cup to distract populations from economic or political problems. Others used it to unite divided populations emotionally. Because when millions focus on football together, national tension temporarily decreases. The World Cup became one of the most effective emotional distractions ever invented, and politicians understood this immediately. Without the World Cup, governments lose one of the strongest peaceful emotional tools ever created. But there is another side to this story. A darker side, because the World Cup also exposed humanity's obsessions, corruption, inequality, and emotional manipulation. Hosting tournaments became extremely expensive. Some countries spent billions, while ordinary citizens struggled financially. Corruption scandals emerged. Construction controversies emerged. Workers suffered in certain projects. Political manipulation increased. National pressure became psychologically overwhelming for players. Sometimes athletes carried the emotional weight of entire nations. One missed penalty could turn a hero into a villain overnight. That level of emotional pressure is not normal. The World Cup created unimaginable glory, but also unimaginable pressure. Without the tournament, millions of athletes avoid that psychological burden entirely. Think about the 1994 World Cup tragedy involving Andrés Escobar. Andrés Escobar scored an own goal for Colombia. Later, he was murdered. One football moment became connected to violence and national rage. That reveals something uncomfortable about humanity. The World Cup magnifies emotion so intensely that people sometimes lose rationality completely. And yet, despite this danger, humans continue returning every 4 years. Why? Because the World Cup gives people something modern life often lacks: collective meaning. Modern life is psychologically fragmented. People feel isolated, disconnected, distracted, lonely. But during the World Cup, billions participate in the same emotional narrative together. That creates belonging. And belonging is one of the strongest human needs. Without the World Cup, humanity becomes slightly more emotionally disconnected from itself. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Now think about children. This might be the most important consequence of all. The World Cup gave billions of children dreams. A child in a poor neighborhood could watch global superstars and think something revolutionary. That could be me. That thought changes lives. Dreams alter human behavior. Dreams create discipline. Dreams create effort. Dreams create sacrifice. Entire generations trained harder because the World Cup existed. Without it, millions may never pursue football seriously at all, and football academies worldwide become smaller. Street football culture weakens. Global talent pipelines shrink. Some legendary players never emerge because the emotional inspiration disappears, and this changes culture itself. Entire generations trained harder because the World Cup existed. Without it, millions may never pursue football seriously at all, and football academies worldwide become smaller. Street football culture weakens. Global talent pipelines shrink. Some legendary players never emerge because the emotional inspiration disappears, and this changes culture itself. Because football is not merely entertainment in many countries, it is identity, especially in parts of South America, Africa, and Europe. The World Cup became proof that smaller or poorer nations could emotionally challenge powerful countries. That psychological effect matters enormously. When smaller nations defeat giants, populations feel possibility. Hope expands, national confidence rises. Sports sometimes psychologically influence how populations see themselves. Without the World Cup, some countries lose major moments of collective confidence and pride. Now, imagine media history without the tournament. Television itself grew partly through sports. Live sports encouraged families to gather around screens. Broadcasters invested heavily in technology because global audiences demanded better coverage. Camera technology improved, satellite broadcasting improved, live production systems improved, commentary culture evolved, sports documentaries exploded, highlight culture exploded. Even modern reaction content online owes something to sports culture, because sports taught humans to emotionally react together in real time. Without the World Cup, global media evolution becomes slower and less emotionally unified. And perhaps the strangest effect of all would involve memory. The World Cup became a time machine for generations. People remember their lives through tournaments. I remember where I was in 2002. I remember watching that final with my father. I remember crying after that penalty. I remember the streets after we won. Football tournaments became emotional timestamps inside human memory. Without the World Cup, billions lose some of the strongest emotional memory anchors of their lives. That sounds small, but psychologically, it is massive. Because memory shapes identity, and shared memories shape civilizations. The World Cup helped humanity create shared emotional history. Not political history, not military history, emotional history. That may be its greatest achievement of all. But the deeper question remains unanswered. If the World Cup never existed, what would replace it? Would another sport dominate globally instead? Would the Olympics become even larger emotionally? Would humanity create another ritual serving the same psychological purpose? Or would the world simply become more fragmented, more isolated, and less emotionally connected across borders? Because despite all its flaws, the World Cup does something extraordinary. It reminds humanity that competition does not always require destruction. Nations can fight emotionally without bombs, without invasions, without armies. For 90 minutes, conflict becomes symbolic instead of deadly. That may sound simplistic, but symbolic competition matters enormously in human civilization. Sports redirect tribal instincts away from violence, not perfectly, but meaningfully. And the World Cup became one of the largest, peaceful battlefields humanity ever invented. Without it, perhaps nationalism becomes expressed more dangerously elsewhere. Perhaps people seek other forms of tribal conflict. Perhaps global unity becomes weaker. Or perhaps another cultural phenomenon rises to replace it. But replacing something this emotionally powerful would be incredibly difficult, because the World Cup succeeded for one simple reason. It merged identity, storytelling, competition, history, emotion, and hope into one giant global ritual. Very few human creations achieve that, and that is why every 4 years the world stops. Not completely, but enough to notice, enough to feel, enough for billions of people to emotionally synchronize across continents, enough for strangers to cry together, enough for history to pause temporarily. And maybe that is the strangest truth about the World Cup. The tournament itself is temporary, but the emotions it creates become permanent. The deeper you study human civilization, the more you realize something strange. People do not survive only through food, money, technology, or governments. People survive psychologically through stories. Stories give meaning to suffering. Stories give meaning to sacrifice. Stories give meaning to identity. And the World Cup became one of the most powerful modern stories humanity ever created. Every 4 years, billions of people emotionally enter the same narrative. Underdogs rise, giants fall, heroes emerge, villains appear, nations hope, nations collapse emotionally, entire populations dream together. The World Cup feels almost ancient in its psychological structure. It resembles old tribal rituals, ancient competitions, mythological wars, ceremonies where entire societies gathered around symbolic conflict. The only difference is that modern cameras broadcast it globally. But emotionally, Humans are reacting the same way their ancestors reacted thousands of years ago, because human nature has not changed as much as technology has. And perhaps that explains why the World Cup became so powerful. It activated something ancient inside billions of people. Something tribal, something emotional, something deeply human. Now imagine removing that emotional engine entirely from history. What replaces it? The Olympics? Possibly. But the Olympics are different psychologically. The Olympics celebrate many sports simultaneously. Attention becomes fragmented. No single emotional storyline dominates the world completely. Football is different. Football simplifies emotion. One ball, two goals, one winner, one loser. That simplicity allows billions to connect instantly, regardless of language or education. A child understands football. An old man understands football. A billionaire understands football. A poor worker understands football. That universal simplicity gave the World Cup extraordinary power. Without it, humanity loses one of the few truly universal emotional languages. And that matters more than most people realize. Because modern civilization is increasingly divided. Politics divide people. Religion divides people. Economics divide people. Technology divides people. Algorithms divide people. Social media creates separate realities. People no longer experience the same world together. But the World Cup temporarily breaks that fragmentation. For a short moment, billions look at the same thing, feel the same tension, watch the same goal, react to the same drama. Shared attention is becoming extremely rare in modern society. And rare things become valuable. Without the World Cup, humanity becomes slightly more psychologically isolated. Now consider another consequence. Without the World Cup, many countries lose their strongest international emotional identity. Some nations are not globally powerful economically or militarily. But football gave them visibility, recognition, respect. Croatia became globally admired after its football achievements. Croatia transformed emotionally in the eyes of millions through football. Morocco inspired enormous pride across Africa and the Arab world after historic performances. Morocco showed how sport can psychologically elevate an entire region. Argentina's 2022 victory became far bigger than football. Argentina experienced a wave of collective emotional release after decades of waiting. Without the World Cup, many countries lose some of the few moments where the entire planet pays attention to them positively. That changes global psychology. Because attention itself is power. The World Cup redistributed global attention in ways politics never could. Now think about immigration and identity. Football teams often became symbols of multicultural societies. Players from different ethnic backgrounds represented the same flag together. That visual symbolism influenced millions psychologically. It showed unity despite differences. Not perfectly, not always peacefully, but meaningfully. Without the World Cup, many conversations about race, immigration, nationalism, and identity evolved differently. Football forced nations to confront who represented them, who belonged, who was accepted, who became heroes. Sports often reveal social tensions before politics fully understands them. The World Cup acted like a mirror reflecting society back at itself, sometimes beautifully, sometimes painfully. Now imagine technology without football's global pressure. People underestimate how much sports accelerated broadcasting innovation. High-definition television improved partly because audiences demanded immersive sports experiences. Satellite communication expanded partly because global live events became profitable. Streaming technology improved because audiences wanted instant access to matches everywhere. Even internet infrastructure benefited from live sports demand. Massive events forced technology to evolve faster. Without the World Cup, certain technological investments arrive slower. The entertainment industry itself evolves differently. And then there is social media. Modern football culture dominates platforms like YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and X. Highlight clips, reaction videos, tactical analysis, football podcasts, fan debates, memes, edits, documentaries. Entire digital careers exist because football culture exploded globally. Without the World Cup, millions of content creators lose the emotional fuel powering their audiences. Entire online ecosystems shrink dramatically. Even AI sports analysis tools become less valuable. Football became content gold because emotional reactions generate engagement, and engagement became the currency of the internet. Now think about the psychology of ambition. The World Cup changed how athletes viewed possibility. Children no longer dreamed only locally, they dreamed globally. A child in Rwanda could imagine becoming globally known through football. A child in Brazil could imagine carrying an entire nation emotionally. A child in France could imagine lifting the most famous trophy on earth. Dreams expand behavior, and behavior shapes history. Without the World Cup, millions may choose safer, smaller, less ambitious paths in life, because inspiration disappears silently. Most people never notice how many lives were shaped indirectly by one global event. But history is often built from invisible psychological influence, and the World Cup created enormous invisible influence. Now consider the economic machine surrounding football. Without the World Cup, some cities never modernize their infrastructure. Some airports are never expanded, some rail systems are never built, some tourism industries never explode, some sponsorship markets never emerge, some sports agencies never exist, some betting industries remain smaller, some television empires never become dominant. Entire financial ecosystems grew around football obsession, and obsession is economically powerful. Humans spend money emotionally first, rationally second. The World Cup mastered emotional spending. People buy jerseys because of identity, flags because of belonging, subscriptions because of fear of missing out, travel experiences because of memory creation. Emotion drives economics, and few events generated emotion at World Cup scale. Now let us go deeper. What happens psychologically when humanity loses a major source of hope? Because that is what the World Cup truly sells. Hope. Every 4 years, countries believe impossible things might happen. Underdogs believe giants can fall. Fans believe miracles are possible. Entire populations emotionally restart their hopes. Hope is not trivial. Hope keeps humans moving forward, and football repeatedly manufactured hope on a global scale. Think about how many famous moments were considered impossible before they happened. Saudi Arabia defeating Argentina in 2022 shocked the world. 2022 FIFA World Cup reminded humanity that unpredictability still exists. Greece winning Euro 2004 shocked Europe. Leicester City winning the Premier League shocked football history. These moments matter psychologically because modern life often feels controlled by systems, wealth, and power. Sports temporarily restore belief that impossible things can still occur. Without global football culture, humanity loses some of its most visible demonstrations of unpredictability and hope. Now think about masculinity and emotional expression. In many societies, men struggle to express emotion openly, but football creates socially accepted emotional release. Men cry during football, celebrate together, hug strangers, express vulnerability publicly. Without the World Cup, millions lose one of the few socially accepted spaces for collective emotional release. That psychological effect is rarely discussed, but it matters deeply. Now imagine the cultural vacuum. Without the World Cup, countless songs never exist, countless advertisements never exist, countless documentaries never exist, countless films never exist, countless friendships never form, countless family traditions disappear. Some fathers never emotionally connect with sons through football. Some communities never gather together. Some childhood memories vanish completely. History is not only shaped by wars and governments, it is shaped by rituals. And the World Cup became one of the largest rituals on Earth. But perhaps the most important question is this: why do humans care so much about a game? Why would billions emotionally invest themselves into men chasing a ball across grass? At first glance, it seems irrational, but the deeper answer reveals something important about humanity. Humans crave meaning beyond survival. Modern life often feels repetitive. Wake up, work, stress, pay bills, repeat. But sports create emotional narratives larger than ordinary life. They create suspense, hope, identity, purpose, belonging, transcendence. For 90 minutes, people forget their ordinary problems and emotionally enter a story. That psychological escape is extremely valuable. Without the World Cup, modern life becomes slightly colder, slightly more mechanical, slightly less magical. And maybe that is why people become so obsessed. Not because football solves life, but because it temporarily makes life feel meaningful together. Now let us imagine the final consequence. Without the World Cup, would humanity actually become more peaceful or less peaceful? Some argue sports nationalism increases division. Fans fight. Countries become hostile emotionally. Tribalism intensifies. That criticism is partially true. But consider the alternative. Humans naturally possess tribal instincts. Those instincts rarely disappear. They simply redirect somewhere else. Football gave humanity a symbolic battlefield. Instead of war, nations competed through sport. Instead of invasion, they fought through goals. Instead of destruction, they fought through performance. That symbolic competition may have reduced other forms of conflict psychologically. Not completely, but enough to matter. The World Cup became one of the few places where humanity could experience intense nationalism without actual warfare. And that may be one of civilization's greatest inventions, transforming tribal energy into symbolic competition instead of violence. Now think about the future. As artificial intelligence expands, automation increases, and digital life becomes more isolated, events like the World Cup may become even more psychologically important. Why? Because humans still need collective experiences. Technology connects information, but it does not automatically create emotional unity. The World Cup still does. Billions still gather, still react together, still celebrate together, still suffer together, still remember together. And maybe that is why the tournament survived generations of technological change. Radio could not kill it. Television could not kill it. Internet culture could not kill it. Streaming could not kill it. Social media could not kill it. Because the World Cup satisfies something deeper than entertainment. It satisfies the human need to belong to a larger emotional story. And perhaps that explains why even people who claim they do not care about football often become emotionally pulled into World Cup energy eventually. The atmosphere becomes impossible to fully ignore. The streets change, the conversations change, the internet changes, the emotions become contagious. That is collective psychology at planetary scale. Very few human creations achieve that level of influence. Now step back and look at the entire picture. Without the World Cup, football probably remains popular, but never becomes this globally dominant. Sports business becomes smaller. Global advertising evolves differently. Some technologies develop slower. Millions of athletes lose inspiration. Entire economies lose revenue. Countries lose symbolic visibility. Media culture changes. Internet culture changes. Collective memory changes. Global rituals become weaker. And billions lose one of the few moments where humanity emotionally synchronizes together. All because one tournament never existed. That is the terrifying power of culture. Sometimes culture shapes history more deeply than politics. And the World Cup became one of the strongest cultural forces modern civilization ever produced. Not because it was perfect, not because it solved humanity's problems, but because it gave billions something increasingly rare. Shared emotion, shared memory, shared identity, shared hope. In the end, the World Cup is not truly about football. Football is only the language. The real story is humanity searching for belonging, searching for meaning, searching for connection, searching for moments that make ordinary life feel larger than itself. And every 4 years, for a brief moment, the world finds that feeling together. That is why the World Cup matters. And that is why a world without it would feel far emptier than most people could ever imagine.